This is John Malcolmson, coordinator for the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University. You are listening to the Art of Spiritual Direction workshop with Leonetta Elaiho, speaking about how she applies spiritual direction. I encourage you to take a listen.
In the first evening in this series, we discuss the roots, the foundations of this art of spiritual direction, seeping into the soil and understanding the history of this work. And then we moved up and grew up the trunk of spiritual direction, and we heard wise words on the practices, the core that gives shape and solidness to the body of spiritual companionship, holds everything together. And today, I'm excited that we get to talk about the applications, the way that spiritual direction branches out, the way that it reaches, the way that it blossoms and bends, and how this work is being applied through the seasons of our time and the moments that we inhabit. I want to share how I describe spiritual direction as a companion to people that come that might want a companion with me. And I describe it as an invitation for us to look together for the presence of the divine in the beauty and brokenness of everyday moments. Given that the gift of having spiritual companionship has radically changed my life, I came into training because I wanted this practice and intention to be intentional, to hold space for leaders that were Black, Indigenous, other people of color, leaders who are at the front lines of social justice movements, organizations that are centering and serving those that are marginalized, young people and young adults, those that are often outside of maybe some of the more traditional areas and communities where spiritual direction is thriving. So I've been practicing holding space in these communities for a few years now, and I have learned quite a bit what companionship and the application of spiritual direction for me has evolved quite a bit over time. I want to share a quote from Reverend Dr. Barbara Holmes, who is probably the theologian and mystic who's most shaped my embodied spirituality, and she describes spiritual direction in this way. Spiritual direction is the practice of holy presence and the gift of shared wisdom. The intent is to help us awaken as we journey so that we can recognize the sacred within and be able to understand the mystery of purpose that permeates the cosmos. In African American and many other non-Western cultural contexts, spiritual direction is both formal and informal, mystical and practical. It can happen during a very carefully scheduled appointment or spontaneously at a fast food joint or a barbershop where ordinary people seek advice and talk about everything. I love this quote because I think it speaks to what it means to be a companion in such a time as this. It challenges us to think about what are the applications of this practice in this moment. There are a couple of things I want to talk about. The first one is context and community matters. We have to be able to see as companions at three distances. So proximate, up close, what's happening at the intimate, tangible level of the lives of our companions. We have to move up and be able to see eagle eye. What's the context that's happening that this life that's coming to us in direction is experiencing? And then seeing at that mystical or cosmic level, what is it that we see with the eyes of the spirit? And oftentimes in companionship, we miss the middle. We miss the eagle eye, right? We see really well what's happening in the individual life, and we can oftentimes try to see and discern what's happening at the level of the spirit. We can kind of track and understand the winds of what's happening on the spiritual realm. But when we actually go eagle eye, it allows us to deepen into the heart of the moment, to see distinct material Yes, for the interior lives of the people that are coming to us, but also the whole, the context. So a spiritual companionship that's for a time such as this is one that can reach the marginalized by seeing the context by which they exist within, the community that surrounds them in the work that they're doing. So when I think about this moment and what do I see when I go eagle eye and I think about the folks that I'm holding space for in companionship, we're existing in a time that's constantly pulling us towards an ever widening polarity, red or blue, blue lives matter, or Black lives matter, pro-life, pro-choice. And even if you think, oh gosh, this is getting political, where's she going with this? Even if we think, okay, let's avoid those conversations, often the context of all of these conversations and all of these constant dualisms that are happening in our context and space, they're seeping into our subconscious and they're showing up for those that are coming to us for spiritual direction, and they're coming in within us as those that are holding space. One quick example of this that I often think about is that I engage very differently with the police now than I did 20 years ago. When I am pulled over by a cop, the anxiety and the things that shoot through my system are also informed by the context of what has happened over the last 2 years, 3 years, 10 years in policing in this country. I also think about what is different maybe in the adrenaline in the system of a police officer pulling over me as a Black woman or my son as a Black young man, right? So there is a context that we're existing in. And this year, 2023 AGF, as I like to say, after George Floyd, the palpable racialized trauma that many carry is not absent of the spiritual walk in life. It's completely infused in the experience of many people who could today still be writing hymns, I've been buked and I've been scorned. As Richard Rohr would say, St. Ignatius would probably say God in all things. So one of the things in the spiritual companionship that the space that I hold, I often say I'm holding a big cauldron, pour everything in, all things being appropriate. And that all things being appropriate is a very important tagline, because it's to say that whatever's present to you, whatever matters to you in this moment, we can spend time here discussing. I come from, in part, many traditions, but one of them in the Wesleyan tradition, we often say, how is it with your soul? And oftentimes directees and companions are not conscious at the soul level of what's happening. But if you ask, what is triggering you in this moment? What's happening at the level of emoting anger, confusion, anxiety, frustration, joy, peace? It opens up an opportunity to understand and to get to the spirit. Many of the ways that I think about everything belongs speaks to some of the various ways that these applications of spiritual companionship can happen. For me, it's happened in a walks around Seward Park, where I can walk with a young person and we kind of walk through and talk about what's happening in their lives. It happens over a bowl of pho and eating. It can happen over text message. I've been texting all week with one of my directees who thinks I'm a heretic about a book that I recommended that he read. And so all of that context matters. And so I'm going to just close and share one quick thought. This morning, a poem came to me, a particular line of the poem that I think is a great opportunity to close. And I'll try to make one quick point about this after I read it. It's called Alone by Maya Angelou. Many of you maybe have heard it. Lying, thinking last night, how to find my soul a home where water is not thirsty and bread loaf is not stone. I've come up with one thing and I don't believe I'm wrong, that nobody, but nobody can make it out here alone. Alone, all alone, nobody, but nobody can make it out here alone. Now, if you listen closely I'll tell you what I know. Storm clouds are gathering. The wind is going to blow. The race of man is suffering, and I can hear the moan. Because nobody can make it out here alone. Alone, all alone. Nobody can make it out here alone. And as I close, I just wanted to, the line that came to me this morning from this poem was, the race of man is suffering and I can hear the moan. Part of what we get to do as spiritual direction is listen for the moans. So when I was trained in spiritual direction, I was trained about threefold listening, right? I'm listening to myself, I'm listening to the spirit, I'm listening to the directee, and I would offer fourfold listening. So I'm adding the context of listening to the community, listening to the context, listening to what is happening in the space where our directees are living. The moans of our trans family members who suffered violence and erasure, the moans of our LGBTQ plus family, the moans of our beloved planet that's heaving in climate fluctuations, our resident orcas who are moaning on the brink of extinction, the moans of mothers who are hearing their sons and daughters cry out to them in exasperation as they can no longer breathe under the weight of state violence, the moans of those suffering in our midst with illness, chronic health challenges, the moans of the unhoused, the moans of refugees, the moans of those experiencing war and very present danger. We can go on and on. And so I'll close with just the invitation that as we are leaning into companionship, how we are hearing the context, listening to the moans of this time and place, and also creating space that everything belongs. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Art of Spiritual Direction workshop with Leonetta Elaiho, speaking about how she applies spiritual direction for the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University. Visit us and engage more content at seattleu.edu/thecenter.